Welcome. In this explainer, we're going to build the pyramid of power for the Indian government. We'll start at that ceremonial peak and work our way down to the real seat of authority to figure out, who's actually holding the reins. So you look at this huge, complex machine that is the Indian state, and you've got to ask, who's really in charge? Well, the answer? It's probably a little more complicated than you think. And this really gets to the heart of it. See, India's parliamentary system is interesting because it has two executive heads. You've got the president on one side, that's the ceremonial or you could say nominal head of state, and then on the other side, there's the prime minister, who holds the actual day-to-day executive power. So let's start at the very top of that pyramid and unpack what this all means.
Okay, let's kick things off at the absolute peak of our pyramid, the president. We're going to see what this ceremonial leader role is all about.
Right. So the Constitution officially calls the president the nominal head. And what does that mean? Well, it means they're the head of the country in title, on paper. All official business is done in their name. But, and this is a big but, the actual decision-making power? Yeah, that's what someone else.
So what does it actually take to become president? The qualifications are pretty straightforward, really. You have to be a citizen of India, of course. You've got to be at least 35 years old, and you need to be qualified to be a member of the Lok Sabha, that's the lower house of parliament. Oh, and you can't be holding any other government office. The term lasts for 5 years.
Okay, so how does someone actually become the president? This is interesting because it's not like they're elected directly by the people. Nope, the process is completely different.
The president is chosen indirectly through a special body called the Electoral College. And just to be clear, this isn't a university or a physical place. It's really just a group of people who are chosen specifically to cast this one very important vote.
And who makes up this Electoral College? Well, it's a perfect reflection of India's federal system. You've got all the elected members of the national parliament, that's both houses, the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, and you have all the elected members of the state legislative assemblies. This is designed so the president represents not just the central government, but the states as well. It's a pretty clever system.
But why? Why go through all this trouble for an indirect election? Well, the framers of the Constitution had a very good reason for this. They did it on purpose to avoid a major power clash. Think about it. If you had both the president and the prime minister directly elected by the people, you could end up with two competing centers of power. That could cause all sorts of political instability. Now, just like there's a very specific way to elect a president, there's an equally tough process to remove one. It's called impeachment, and it can only happen if the president is accused of violating the Constitution. And let me tell you, it's a really high bar to clear. It requires a special 2/3 majority in both houses of parliament to actually pass. So it's not something that can be done lightly. All right, we've covered the ceremonial peak. Now let's travel down the pyramid to its powerful base. This is where we find the real executive authority, the prime minister. Okay, before we get into the PM's role, we need to talk about the president's power, or at least their apparent power, because on paper it looks massive. They appoint all the top officials, they summon parliament, and this is a big one. No bill can become a law without their signature. So it really seems like they have the final say on everything, right? Well, here's the catch. And honestly, this is probably the single most important rule in the entire system. The president uses all these huge powers almost exclusively on the advice of the prime minister and their team. That signature? It's really just a formality. The real decision, the one that matters, comes straight from the prime minister's office. So yeah, the prime minister is the real center of power. They're the main advisor to the president, they run the cabinet, they lead the majority party in parliament, they're the government's chief spokesperson, and they're the face of the nation on the world stage. They wear a lot of hats. Now, obviously the prime minister isn't doing all this alone. They lead a big team called the Council of Ministers, which is pretty much the main engine of the government. This council has a clear structure, kind of like a 3-tiered system. Right at the top, you've got the cabinet ministers. These are the heavy hitters, the senior leaders holding the most important jobs. Think finance, defense, home affairs. And then below them, you have ministers of state and deputy ministers who support them. And this hierarchy is really important to understand. The whole Council of Ministers can be a pretty big group, but the actual nitty-gritty day-to-day decisions, those happen inside that small, powerful inner circle of cabinet ministers who are in constant consultation with the prime minister. Okay, so you've got all of this power concentrated with the prime minister and their cabinet. That leads to a pretty important question. What's stopping them from doing whatever they want? What systems are there to keep that power in check?
Well, it really comes down to two key principles. The first is called collective responsibility. This means the entire government is accountable to the lower house of parliament. So if the government loses a big vote, a no confidence motion, everyone has to resign. They basically swim or sink together. Then there's individual responsibility. This gives the prime minister the power to just ask the president to dismiss any minister who's not doing their job well.
All right, let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. Why does this system exist at all? Why was this whole pyramid of power designed this way? The main goal, really, was stability. This parliamentary system creates a super clean separation between two very different jobs. You have the head of state, the president, who's meant to be a symbolic, unifying figure, someone above all the party politics. And then you have the head of government, the prime minister, who handles the political, messy, day-to-day job of actually running the country. The whole idea behind this split is to prevent conflict at the very top. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. As the world changes, as the challenges facing countries get more complex, is this traditional split between a ceremonial head and a real political head, is it still the best, most effective way to govern in the 21st century? That's something every democracy, not just India, has to think about.